Right, so good morning and welcome to this two-part Seascape demonstration art project. I'm going to be painting for you today. As I said, ask any questions as we're going along and I will do my best to answer them as I paint. We're going to be working from the handout that I sent you. So we'll just put that up on the screen and then we'll make a start. If you've got, hopefully, you've got this handout. So let's just flick over to this handout. That was the handout I emailed to you, which has got the two photos as reference, and then a couple of other photos of a painting that I've got here and one that I sold some time ago. But it got the idea of having loose figures and the windbreaks, because although this is a lovely painting, it will be quite nice, I felt, to try and incorporate a couple of windbreaks and some figures and make the dunes, if we put them in, but less dominant. When you look at this painting is all about, this one's all about the sky, tiny dots of figures, and it's mainly about the sand dunes and the light on the sand dunes. But I wanted to sort of have this less dominant and incorporate figures and show you how to do a couple of these windbreaks, which is something that I've done quite recently, and they're rather fun to do as well, and they're quite effective. So making a start, if you just take a look at my palette, these are the colours we're going to use, which are the ones that are on the list. So I put I've used I've used a tear-off palette as the same as I recommended. I know the light's a little bit bright on it. We've got a titanium white, the lemon yellow, and I'm using raw sienna. Got cadmium red, then magenta, ultramarine blue, cerulean blue, or that's Serif blue. It's very, very similar. And I've got Venetian red or burnt sienna. Either is, again, very similar. So those are all the colours you're going to need. And I've got I've actually got three brushes here. I did say a larger one, but I've got the number 4, got the number 4 round and the long filbert. That's not a long filbert. Where's the long filbert gone? That's the long filbert. The number 4 long filbert. That's a number 6 filbert, because if you look at it compared to the number 8, which is bigger and a bit older, I think the number 6 on my canvas is probably going to be big enough for the blocking in, because I did recommend that you used about a 16 by 12 inch canvas, which is this size. This one that I'm going to paint on is fractionally longer, but we won't necessarily paint on all of it. This is an MDF board rather than a canvas board, and I have put a couple of coats. You can see it's only thin. It's about 2 mil thick. I've put a coat of white gesso primer on it, and then I put a coat of white yellow gesso, in so much as I just get a tiny bit of raw sienna and squirt it into half a pot of the yellow gesso, so that I've got a coloured one. Because working on this, especially for a summery beach scene, a sort of a warm, sort of a custard yellow, it sort of brings the sun through the clouds, and because it's almost a beach colour in places. So that's why I've primed my canvas with this colour. You don't have to use a colour. You can just see how it works on this painting and try something else. If you're doing a very, very much a Cornish scene, I quite often work on a pink, a cool pink colour. It gives that sort of cool look.
Sorry, which yellow was it?
The yellow one here, I've just put a little squirt of raw sienna.
Raw sienna, right?
Yeah, raw sienna or yellow ochre are very similar. Raw sienna is slightly darker. I mixed it in with my half pot of. I don't think it's down there actually. I just have these. Sorry.
Sorry, and another question I had was about the magenta. You said on your handout all permanent rose. I don't know actually either of those, but I have got something called rose madder. Is that the same?
That'll be fine. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, that'll be fine. Those are the pots of gesso that I buy. Really cheap ones for the works. I mean, that's the white one. But when it's either split them into 2 jars or have a little pot somewhere, and I have a smaller amount that I squirt the yellow into, or I'll make a grey sun with ultramarine and burnt sienna. I'll make a sort of cool bluey grey colour as well. It's down to personal choice, but I would certainly give it a try. If you don't generally paint on a coloured ground, I would give it a try, because it's sort of quite useful to make us, to use as a to see what the difference is. Now,
Melanie, is gesso meant to be thick? I mean, I have used it in the past, but it does seem very thick. Or do you dilute it?
The gesso?
Yes.
Well, the cheap one from the works. Do you find that thick? I don't find that particularly thick. The idea is it's a priming layer. It should be a solid layer of colour. If it is too thick, with gesso with acrylic, you can always thin it with water. If you want to, then just thin it. What I would tend to do is I'd split it, put it in another little pot, and just thin some of it in case you overdo it or whatever.
So you're using oil paint, raw sienna, in the gesso, yeah?
No, I'm using, in the gesso, you must put acrylic.
Oh, that's what I was not clear about. So it's
no,
acrylic.
Because gesso, it says on the thing, white acrylic gesso.
Right.
It's basically like a very white, it's like a very matte white primer, like emulsion paint.
Yes, yes.
Yes, you can squirt a little bit, but you must use, you've got to use acrylic, because it's an acrylic base. If you put oil in this, God knows what it would do. It wouldn't be terribly good. Right, I've just shown you this. I've taken a bit of my burnt sienna and quite a lot. I'm thinning the colours here with white spirit. You could use zestic because it wouldn't be as smelly, but I'm not too worried about that. See, that's very watery. And I'm going to use that instead of a pencil or charcoal, just to draw on the composition. So that's, you can choose any colour. I mean, it's up to you. So I've just got that on my round brush. I'm looking at the composition. The first decision to make is where's the horizon going? Because I do want this to have some sort of figures. And I was hoping that this was going to be much more about the beach and the figures and the water than it is going to be about the sky. Because I've done a lot of demonstrations on sky and more will follow. But it's quite interesting. And if we make the horizon too low, we're not going to have a lot of room for putting figures in. So I was thinking about trying to put my horizon up here, which is probably, look at this very wobbly line, it's probably towards about a third down, a third of the way down, because I want to have, and I want to think then that I've got this little suggestion that there's going to be some sand dunes, but again, I don't want the sand dunes to dominate. So that's the sand dunes are going to go down there. You can fiddle with this, and if you're doing this in whites with oil paint, it will dry off fairly quickly, this thin down paint, but also you can always get a rag and wipe it off if you don't like it. Because I'm now looking at my my photograph and thinking what I really want is a suggestion of some life. Now there's a chap actually sat there, and all you can see really is a head and an arm. And I think there's someone else sat here that are sort of sat on the dunes. And look, just by putting a little blob there, we can actually include a thing. Over here, you've got this lovely windbreak. So I'm just going to put this in. I'm going to mark in. I don't really want it to be, do I want it to go all the way off? It goes all the way off, but then you see that distance there. I don't really want my windbreak to be, I might just bring it quite a long way to the edge. So that's going to be where the windbreak's going. And then the sea's a bit further out. So this is very much going to be a beach scene about the beach. So my sea line, pretty much up there is where the sea's going to be. So that's going to be water. There is a bit of land which we could put in, but I don't want it to come too set. We might just have a tiny bit of land up there and just thicken that horizon line up. That'll do for a land. So this is the stage when you first start. I'm just going to thin that line. You might want to put it. You may well want to put one pencil line on here for your straight horizon, which I haven't done, which is a bit naughty. But that's going to be so that's going to be my bit of land. And I'm taking my time planning the painting out. Also looking at this stage, you might think, oh, I don't want to put figures in yet. Well, actually, it's quite useful if you do think about your figures. Because I'm thinking, again, it's very easy. We'll have an easy one there. There's somebody stood behind the windbreak. And then there's probably somebody there's a whole little group of people here that are they're sat down. Most of them are sat down, actually. I'm doing sat down because they're easier for you. And somebody said, it's just a lozenge, really, to put that up there. And then I'm going to remind me there's going to be some other little dots over here, these are going to be much smaller figures, aren't they? They're going to be in the distance where the water is. So this is not so much painting lots of things as sort of thinking around what's going to happen. There is a little boy here, but I think maybe a bit of dunes and maybe a bit of light coming through. And that could be empty sand. And this could be lots of things going on over here and some waves. So there's this, yeah, I think there might be somebody walking up. Yeah, there could be somebody walking up here. There are so many figures on this on the photographs that I sent you. You've got scope to put as many in as you like. There might be somebody walking up with their, well, I'm going to say they're walking up with their dog, but you're probably not allowed dogs on beaches, are you? But it would be quite nice to have somebody walking up with their dog. So that's that. So is this, this is sort of giving you some ideas. And you might say, oh, well, you're going to paint all those out. Well, no. So having sort of decided that I've got a feeling of, look how quickly that, and you see there's probably another blob over there, another 2 blobs. You see how quickly you can get a feeling of quite large figures, medium-sized figures, and little tiny dots that we will paint later. I'm going to give you a challenge. You've got all week to do it. So, and then the sky becomes not very important. Now, the sky on the photograph is actually, I'll just pull this down. You see, the sky on the photograph is completely washed out. There's nothing. It's just very grey. Now, I don't want it very grey, but I do want to have it not too much going on, because there's going to be a lot going on. Sorry, I'm coming across the camera here for a moment. Pin it back up. There's going to be a lot going on the beach. So the sky is going to be fairly simple. And in fact, at this stage, we now want to establish the colour. So that's sort of the end of part 1, really, isn't it? That's drawing it on. So what we want to do now is establish the colour of the sea and the beach and the sky before we start working on, the details. I've got this number 6. I said a number 8, but I think maybe the number 6 is going to be big enough. So we need to mix up some colours now for the sky and the sea. So let's just switch over so you can see the palette. Go back to my palette. What I'll do with this bit of water is I would wipe this off or scrape it off on a wooden palette, because it's, with the tear off, I know you can tear it off and move it on, but that's good enough. That's cleaning the palette up again now. So the sky colour and the sea colour. The sea I want to be on the main page is quite blue. This is when I realised that I haven't got my palette knife. That's stupid of me. I think I'm actually going to put the sea in first. So I'm going to take a bit of ultramarine blue, add a little bit of the cerulean blue, and some white. And I would be mixing this with a knife, except that my knife is in the paint box, so that's quite a dark colour. Maybe go a little bit more on this end, a bit more ultramarine. Now that's quite a strong colour there, very strong colour, but it's also not very realistic. So if you take a tiny bit of the burnt sienna and add it, I don't know if you can see, but that actually has changed it. Partly is what you can see, but also if I keep talking about it, when we come to do the demonstration, when you come to paint, you'll be able to think, oh yes, that's the colour mix you used, and try it for yourself. So I'm going to take that blue, which is going to look quite strong here. Stay there. I may need to pin this just to stop it running around quite a strong blue. Even that might not be dark enough for the distance, but I'm not sure. So at the moment, this is my darkest blue, which is mainly ultramarine and white, and a little bit of this burnt sienna, just to sort of stop it looking. It turns it very slightly greeny grey. It doesn't really show up on the actual film, but it is a greeny grey, very slightly. And then as I come down, I'm going to alter the colour on the sea, and I'm just trying to flip between the cameras because I want to show you what's happening here. On this side, it's mainly cerulean and white, going paler to there, before eventually we will add a tiny bit of raw, in my case it's raw sienna, but you might be using the yellow ochre. And that, with a lot of white, will give a very pale greenish colour, which is, so it's going to be deep water, medium water, very shallow water. So now we'll go to the main camera and wipe the, I don't always clean the brush, but I do keep wiping the excess colour off it with a kitchen roll. In fact, I am going to clean the brush next, it's gone very turquoise. Coming back to this middle colour there, you see that's the pretty much cerulean and white rather than the ultramarine influence. And I'm building this up slowly in layers, so that gives you the idea that the sea there is getting shallower. I haven't blended it at the moment deliberately because I want you to see how it goes on. Because this is not, this is a demonstration painting, so you're going to have to be able to work from it. So now we're coming down to the mix of sort of slightly greeny colour, which is the cerulean blue and some of the raw sienna and white, and probably more white, because not only is it going greener, but we need it to go paler. And this is where we get into where the figures are, so we'll sort of just paint over them for a minute. So my sea is made up, in effect, of 3 stripes. And in fact, that lovely turquoise, that very pale green, if you put another little bit there, that could become a sort of, because we've got this the colour on, because the colour is yellow of the board, you can see it's almost reading as a beach without me doing anything. But that's the sort of blend that we've got in the sea. And then yes, you do need to blend it in. If I now blend it back a bit, just a little bit, you need to put a layer of paint on. If you've made your paint too watery, if you put too much spirit or Sansa or whatever you're using in it, you won't be able to blend it so well because you won't physically have enough paint on the canvas to do it. So there we've got our sort of initial feeling of the sea. Whilst we've got the dark sea colour, you go back to the darkest mix, which is this back colour. Load your round brush and don't forget to put a few little stripes, like little lozenges, into the paler area. I don't know if I can bring this painting a bit further. I'll try and bring it a bit further in a minute. Because what you want is you want a few little dark bits. And this is the ultramarine blue and burnt sienna, more or less on its own with a little bit of white. That's it, that's it, so it shows up a bit darker. Because those are going to be the back of the waves. And in fact, if I just bring this, what I'll do is I'll move the painting rather than the camera. Can you see that that's got those little sort of dark shapes in it, shadows in the water? Because we might as well get this bit done. So you can see how it works. So go back to the bigger brush, take up some white paint. Now my white paint's probably got a tiny bit of blue in it on my number 6 brush, and then just go along here with some colour. You might even want to do this with a round brush. I mean, you can do it with whatever brush you like, but just putting it on the top of some of these shadows. I'm just bringing down where there's a wave, where the wave is actually broken. And honestly, it is that simple at this small scale to get those waves to come onto the shore. Look at that. And then you've got a little bit of light coming on there where the water's running up onto the beach. the fact that we've got this lovely, we're working on a yellow ground is making it much easier. There's another little bit there. Look at that, isn't that effective?
Fantastic.
Yes, very, yes.
And that's easy to do. On a small scale, you should all be able to do that. And you will all be able to do it. But I wanted to show you that so you can see that you see it's actually pretty much done. So now, having got this colour for the sea, I can sort of almost visualise this colour for the land, and I'm getting a feeling for the sky. So what we'll do is we'll put all that in next. The land is very, it's very distant. It's probably quite purpley. So if I take the same colour I've used for the sea, the ultramarine blue, let's just go back and show you them. I'm trying to show you all the mixes because this is a, this is a learning video. It's not just a demo video. So there's the dark blue, and I want to put a tiny bit of probably magenta to make a sort of purple colour. And that's very strong, but we want it to be a lot paler than that. We want a sort of pale mauve. There's a pale mauve. And alongside that, I want a little bit of a green. Now, I could use, if we put it on the palette, we could use Naples yellow, but we're not going to. We're going to stick to simpler colours. And this is my raw sienna and a bit of ultramarine, and again, a bit of white. And it makes a sort of, a bit more blue, it makes a sort of sludge green grey colour. So I've got a sludge green grey and a sort of sludgy purple. Because when you look at things in the distance, they're not that dark. I mean, this might still look a bit dark, it doesn't quite look dark enough, needs a bit more purple in it. Because what I want it to be is visible as land, and we can always put a little bit of sand along the edge. But it's a sort of purple come sludgy green colour. And we can put highlights and other thing, but that's the base colour for my land. And that gives you the sort of distant hill. And to pull it out, if you take a little bit of white and raw sienna, you can sort of give it its beach. Now, this is going to take a little bit, just put a little bit along there. And maybe a little bit further along. That sort of, let's be a bit more yellow, I think. Just adjusting it. And that might be a little bit too strong. You can always blend it into the sea. Blend into the sea a bit to try and give it maybe a bit of finger on there will do, to sort of feel that there is some distant distant cliffs or whatever. There we go, just paint that a bit darker. It's a start. You see, that's gone a little bit not grey, it's a bit too thick. I just want to bring it back down again. But we've got a feeling that there might be some land out there. Without it being too deep. The deeper you make this, the taller you make this, the more it comes forward and becomes dominant, and sometimes it can look a bit rubbish. So having done that, I'm turning my attention to blocking in the sky, because this painting's all about the beach. So I really want to get the sky and that kind of done. I'm going to drop this down a second so you can see to the top of the sky. And we've got about a third, we've not got a huge area. But the sky, on the photograph, it looks very cloudy and sort of almost slightly pinky. I want it to be more summery, but even this area, it's not very high up in the sky. It's not going to be a really dark blue. And the more you come down towards the horizon, we're painting a picture which is kind of towards the middle of the day. It's quite bright. So the horizon area, it's not going to be pink towards evening. It's going to be fairly creamy. And you get a recession of colour in the sky that, because we're not using watercolour, because we're using oils, in order to get your lighter colours, you've got to add white paint. So I've gone back, and for my sky colours, we're going to go and use the same colours. It keeps it all consistent. So where I've got the cerulean blue here and the white in the edge of my, you see that's gone purple, and I'm still mixing in the same pool. Probably that cerulean white is probably going to be dark enough, although it looks very pale on there, for the sky, for the top of the sky. So now it's a question of sticking it on and seeing how it looks, and then thinking, is it going to look okay? Yes, it probably is. So what I'm doing now is I'm using a technique called scrubbing it on. I've not thinned the colour with any spirit. I'm just thinning it by the movement of the brush. I've got a pretty loaded brush and I'm holding it quite firmly in the hand and literally scrubbing it. I'm not making individual brush strokes like that. I'm actually holding the brush and moving it around, not to collapse it, but just about halfway, because the paint, you see the paint is beginning to creep up the brush. So that's annoying. So what I do with that is I wipe that paint off, because it's no good up there. I want the paint's got to be on the tip, otherwise it doesn't, we can't use it. I have used most of my whites, so I'll put a bit more white out. So just go back into this pale blue. So it's more or less the same pale blue all along the top. But even there, see, it's gone a bit lighter because I've mixed a bit more white in it, had to remix it. You have to remix your colour. That's quite good because it means you'll get variation. So there we are. We've got a scrubbed in layer of pale blue. It's actually slightly bluer there than it is over here. So probably the light's coming over here. As you work down, not only add a bit more white there into your mix, but just add a tiny bit of the raw sienna as well. But you can hardly see it. It sort of imperceptibly goes from blue to very, very pale blue until towards the horizon I'm working with white with a tiny bit of raw sienna to try and get a feeling of creamy sort of, I don't know, you can see how this sky, it's getting paler towards the horizon. So I'm scrubbing that in, pushing the paint around. I'm now using, the only colour I'm using now is white with a little bit of raw sienna in it. Just hold this steady for a minute. Stay. Sorry. It's a thin board, it's moving around a bit. But you can see, and I haven't dipped my brush into the thinner or anything. I'm just using the colour. The more you can paint with creamy paints. Now, Jill, are you using water mixable oils?
No, I'm not. I'm using
oils. Someone else.
Zest it. Yeah.
Yeah, someone else I'm teaching. Now, the water mixable oils are very, very thick and stodgy, and you will have to thin them. Whereas traditional oils, you probably don't need to thin them at all. You probably just get away with squirting them out the tube and keeping that, what I call that sort of flora consistency, a light butteriness.
Mm.
Now that technically is a plain sky, but there is variation of colour in it. So there's a bit of blue and it gets much creamier. In fact, there's much more creamy. I know the horizon's gone wobbly. I'm not too worried about that. It's gone much more creamy on this side. And if you really wanted to, you could go back to the purple colour, the pale purple that we mixed for this sky, take that on there. Then you could pick out a little bit. I didn't even clean my brush. It's still got the blue paint on that side, but I've got a bit of purple on here. And you could say, well, actually, I might just put a little bit of, and blend that in and create a few sort of suggestions of a bit of cloud. Not really painting a cloud, I'm just putting a bit of paint on. If you look at that really close up, you can see that's all it is. Let's come down here. I don't know, I might get a bit out of focus. Yeah, and yet it's sort of almost reading as cloud. And that's just the oil paint pushed in with a little bit of pressure into the sticky surface of the sky that I've just painted. So it's not rocket science, it's just handling of the paint and your brush to get that effect. Now I know that I can see that the horizon has gone very wobbly. So I'm going to get a clean brush, same brush, and use this number. I'm going to use a number 6 because it's quite a small canvas. Clean it up and then just take the brush that's cleanish and just sweep it along there and try and pretty much straighten out my horizon. You will find with most seascapes, when you've painted them and they're all dried off on your easel, you need to then go back, get a pencil line, you'll get a ruler on them, and get your horizon dead straight. It's very difficult to get a dead straight horizon when you're painting like this, which is sort of what I'm doing here is pretty much in one go, in one wet. So we've now got all of the sky and a suggestion of a hill and the sea and the waves, and it's all been painted in about 3/4 of an hour.
Very good.
I'm not suggesting that you need to paint at this speed. That is why it's nice. You'll get a more fluid lesson if I keep painting, because I can just keep developing it. What I'm going to say now is that I think we want to put a colour on for the beach and try and leave these, more or less leave these figures visible, and the dunes as a sort of second stage. And then as a third stage, we start to put in the figures and the windbreak and some grasses on the dunes, etc. You could almost say that's the sort of end of the first session. You could leave your painting at that stage to dry if you said, well, I can't do all this in one go. But I would suggest that you at least do the sky and the sea together, because they're all the blues, and then all the colours you mix, because I've used most of the colours for the sea in the sky, lighter versions of it, so it all ties together. And even the bit of purple and sludge colour that I put in there, I use the mauve to pull out that suggestion of clouds, so it's all the same colour mix. Right. Okay, so we're now going to concentrate on the figures and the beach. So I've zoomed the camera in a bit, as you can see. I do want to put some beach colour on first, and it is not far off the right colour, but in order to make these dunes stand up a bit, I'm going to have this a little bit darker. Now I've got a mix here. Let's have a look at the beach colours, shall we? Let's come to the beach colours and see where we're going to go with these. We're going to go with a little bit of the burnt sienna and the white, or burnt sienna, Venetian is burnt sienna. We'll call it burnt sienna because that's more familiar name. That makes quite a pinky colour. Then I'm going to add some of the raw sienna into it, but I don't want it to be too yellow. So can you see that that's going more of a flesh colour almost, a little bit more yellow perhaps, and that will do as a good starter colour for the beach. Now the beach, we're going to need to have wet and dry areas of the beach, but what I'm going to do to start with is just get some colour, and it's going to be very similar to what's already here. So it's more a question of just quickly blocking in some of this paint so that we've got, I think it does need to be a little bit more yellow, so I'm adding a bit more raw sienna into my mix. Yes, and I think we could go a bit lighter further out. Let's go a bit darker. See, that's coming a bit darker. That's got more raw sienna in the mix. So I'm going to use that for a darker colour down here. And I picked up the small brush, which is wrong. I should have picked up the bigger brush. In fact, I'm just going to get my bigger brush because that would be easier. So this is, there's a fair amount of raw sienna in the mix and a little bit of the burnt sienna. But it is giving me a fairly warm, especially down this lower bit here. That figures, you've lost that figure. I'll just move it there. I'll just move it across me. See that figure. And we've got these two bigger ones that are sat on the edge of the dune. That's where my dog's going to go. In this figure. So up to about halfway, I want it to colour to be a little bit more of a dark sand colour, just to get that feeling of being nearer down here. And again, you see I'm scrubbing it in without really lifting the brush much off the actual canvas surface. I tend to sort of move the brush around and just push all that colour in. So that's quite dark and yellowy there.
Have you been thin? Is that thinned at all, or is that just?
No, it's not thinned at all. It's just paint. And it comes up to about the windbreak.
Okay.
Now, further on, I want that sand to be a bit lighter. So I'm adding more white and going more towards a white with burnt sienna in it. So it's a more sort of orangey colour. It's different there. You see that's lighter. But what's really crucial at this stage is do not paint the windbreak. Leave the windbreak with dry canvas. Not so bad if you go a little bit over your figures, but it's quite important that you don't go over your windbreak because of how we're going to paint it. I think these little figures are going to go. I mean, you can keep yours in, but I think we're just going to go there and take them out because they're very tiny dots, and I'll show you how to do those. So we've now got a beach painted more or less up to the edge of the water. And again, I've not been very up here. I've not been very neat with it. I'm just sort of pushing because this is a filbert brush, you can sort of push the edge of it. It's quite easy to paint up to things with the edge of the brush. And again, take your time sometimes to have a bit of a practice with your brush strokes, because you will get.
What number brush are you using, Melanie?
I'm using this number 6.
Number 6.
Yeah, number 6 brush, because it's a smaller canvas, and I'm just pushing the edge of it up to sort of. So I'm holding it. In fact, now I'm holding it sort of more or less overhand like that, so that I can push it up to the edge of things. And we've lost our tiny figures in that corner, but I'm going to start with those next. So having got that colour, oh no, not having got that colour, having got that colour on for the main beach, which is lighter here. This is almost white with burnt sienna, touch of yellow, and then as you come down, I've added a lot more of the raw sienna, or you might be using yellow ochre into the mix, so that there's quite a difference in colour from the front of the beach to the sea, and that's going to help us with our recession in the beach scene. And then where this sand dune is, I'm coming even higher up here and get this onto. I'm just moving it across so you can see it in detail. Where this sand dune is, the sand dune is very pale. So I want to have the dune to be almost just white with a tiny, tiny hint, probably of the burnt sienna, because it will give it pink, slightly pinky cast. But it's got to be, this is another reason for painting this area darker. If you then take the white and just a little bit of the burnt sienna, you're putting that colour on there, and that probably looks almost white on the camera. It does actually, but you know, it isn't. It's a very very pale. We can have some shadow in it in a minute, but at the moment I'm just putting it in really pale to try and get the idea of the very pale dry sand that make up the sand dunes. So again, there's a bit where they're sitting there. He's sitting on that bit lump. But can you see that looks, at the moment, it probably almost looks white, but it's very different from this colour. Okay, but there's going to be bits of shadow in this dune. So this is the last bit of the first painting of the beach. Now, bits of shadow, it's very easy to just use a little bit of ultramarine blue and white. Sort of palish, well, not too palish blue. I'll just show you what I've mixed for a second. And down here a bit. I've just taken, that's the ultramarine blue, but I mixed quite a lot of white into it. And again, I haven't really thinned the paint with spirit at all. I tend to paint a lot of the time with neat paint, but I am using mainly my colours, the ones that were made for me years ago, and they are quite soft and buttery. Winsor & Newton's, not Winsor, Daler Rowney's Georgian colours are pretty similar. Royal Talon's Van Gogh colours are pretty similar feel. So having got that pale blue, I'm just going to take that pale blue and put a little bit in here amongst the shadow to create a little feeling that there might be a bit of shadow in this dune. Just a few little brush marks on there starts to give a feeling of it being shadow. Now, it may still be that it's a little bit like this, but don't forget, when we get to the finishing off, we're going to have to put some grasses in here as well. So at the moment, I would say that's okay. I would say that this is very pale and might need a little bit more darking. Not really, no, just leave it. So at the moment, that looks a bit odd, but that's fine. we've now got to a stage whereby I've painted, moving this around a bit, I've got these dunes, I've got the figures are still in, I've not lost the figure with the dog, I've got somebody sat here and the windbreaks, but I haven't yet done that. I've lost the figures in the distance because they're so small. They were really just marking them in with dots and dashes for how to paint, how to get a feeling of in the far distance. So the next thing to do is to put in the little figures to start to populate the whole beach scene. So we're going to start with these figures up here, these little figures. So I'm going to move that across a bit so you can hopefully see that pretty well. And show you a little trick then for putting some wetness onto the beach so that area of the painting is then finished. Then we'll move on to the windbreak and these figures. And then finally, I'm going to add these extra figures and some tufts of grass into the dunes. And then hopefully we will all have a stunning little summer beach scene based on the beach at West Wittering.
Excellent.
This is the plan. You can take as long as you like and you can have several goes at it, but this is what I'm going to do. So I'm going to take the round brush. Now these figures are literally a sort of a lozenge with a head and a squiggle. You're not really doing figures in any great detail. And if you're going to put a colour on them, so say we have someone wearing pink, water it down, lighten it with white. So if I want to put a little bit of a blob there, I will just do a little sausage blob, and in fact we might have another blob in the same colour. And then I'll take some brown, and the only brown I've got here is burnt sienna, so actually they're going to have a burnt sienna on the head. And I'll put a little blob on there, and that will give them a head. And then they might have some, they could have some white, this one could have white shorts on, so we could put a little white blob there. This one hasn't. And then for the flesh tone, again, I'm using mainly burnt sienna and white. But actually that needs to be a bit darker, doesn't it? Because it's not going to show up against the, so actually I'm going to use a little bit of burnt sienna and white and put a tiny bit of ultramarine blue in it to just get a slightly darker feeling. So we've got a couple of flecks, and I'm just going to put some little flicks on that to try and create a figure. This is very small scale, and you really don't need to worry about it being more than a dot and a dot and a squiggle.
What was the main body colour that you used?
I just used magenta with a little bit of white in it.
Thank you.
And then this one, I'm thinking there's probably somebody with some, there might be a blue blob there. So put a bit of ultramarine blue, and maybe even take a bit of red, but the red might be a little bit, oh, I don't know, have a bit of red for shorts. You can see how it's just a blob and a blob. I'm going to do bigger figures, so don't worry if these look too small. My flesh colour is pretty much, the light flesh colour is white with a bit of burnt sienna in it. The dark flesh colour is white, is the same mix with a bit of, which way is he going? Is he going that way? No, he's going this way. Is with a little bit of blue in it, a bit of ultramarine blue to make it sort of dark. Just put a dark blob on there. That's probably just put a little bit of squiggle. That'll do, a squiggle. And then there might be a bit of a squiggle coming down there in the reflection. Is there going to be a reflection? There could be a bit of a reflection. The sand could be quite wet out there. So don't forget that if you do put reflections, reverse the colours of the clothing so that it's red at the top and then blue. Because obviously it's legs reflected and then shorts and then top. And again, this one, she's just purple, so that's quite easy. There's a bit of skin colour and then there's a bit of purple. And then this one is going to be a little bit of white and a tiny bit of purple there. You see how that reflection will work, more or less. Mm. So we've got a few little blobs of figures. They're very tight. This looks a bit dark here, but anyway, it'll do. And at the same time here, don't forget that we need to have a bit, we've got that little bit of light, we did that bit of pale blue, didn't we, where they're sort of almost walking in the water. But you can go back and put a few extra bits of white paint to make an edge to the sea, because we haven't really got an edge of where the wave is coming in, you know, where the water's running up the beach. So don't forget to then add a little bit more white into your mix there, just to give that bit of feeling of the water coming up onto the beach. You can play around with this, and to be honest, you can scrape it off afterwards and start again, because unless you leave your painting for at least a day, maybe 2 days to dry off, it will stay sticky. So there we just got, by adding just a little bit of extra white with a round brush, I've just brought a few, I'm sort of trying to make a bit more sense of where the green meets the colour of the beach. I sort of put a few little extra bits of white in to try and make it run up onto the beach. But at a small scale, that's all you need. You sure that's in focus? It looks a bit fuzzy to me.
No, it's fine, thank you.
Well, I won't tweak it then, because it could just be my screen. So having put some very tiny figures in, we want to move down and do some larger figures, and then we're going to do the windbreak. So this one, she's definitely got, I quite like that pinky purple colour. That's quite nice, isn't it? It's just soft. So I'm going to take some pure magenta here, and with the pure magenta, I'm just going to paint a couple of brush strokes. If you can see, can you see this well? Is this coming up? That's sort of like the shorts, although it's a bit of a square block. And on top of that, I'm going to put a white, in effect, what's good. It's gone a bit pink, but that's because I haven't cleaned the brush properly. There's a bit of pink that's becoming almost a t-shirt shape. I'm going to paint that. That's a bit bright. Let's just soften that off a bit. And then go to my flesh colour and give her a bald flesh head to start with. Yes, the flesh colour needs to be a bit darker than that. And her arm's coming out here, and she's got a leg going down there, and she's got another leg. She's almost stood straight, actually, this girl, I think. Yeah, she's just looking at her dog. I need it to be a bit dark. You see how the flesh isn't really showing up against the sand colour. So I'm making it much darker. I'm sort of giving her her legs, and she's got much darker coloured there. And then finally, I'm going to put some dark brown on the hair. So I'm putting that on there, and in order to make sure she's looking away from you, you give her a ponytail. And as soon as you give her a ponytail, she's looking away from you. This arm's looking a bit dodgy. So I need to get that get that lighter bit there. Shoulder, I've lost a bit of the shoulder, but yeah, I think her waist needs to come down a bit. The shorts are a bit, it's coming. You see how I'm building the figure up by using sort of brush strokes rather than anything else?
Yeah.
One leg has almost disappeared. Well, it would almost disappear because you wouldn't see it. When someone's striding away from you, you don't really see both legs. So I'm quite pleased with that. Then I'll take some brown. I mean, this is all stuff you're probably going to want to rewatch about 5 times, I should think.
Yeah.
Because here we have a dog. Now, my dog is a sort of long shape, slightly deeper at the front, so it's not quite an oblong, but the tail goes off there, and the head.
What colour is this?
This is burnt sienna with a little bit of ultramarine in it to make it sort of chocolate brown.
Right.
And then the back legs are coming off there, aren't they? Sort of like that, and coming down there. And then his front legs are there, so he's standing quite still, actually, this dog. He looks a bit big. In order to get a bit of shape on him, I'll give him a little bit of white around his neck and on his belly a bit. That might be better. And then the colour, go back to the beach colour, which is get a bit of, I haven't lost it all, get a bit of beach colour, because I think he's a bit big. We just need to put the beach back in around the dog. Yes, you see, we can shrink the dog down a bit by sort of, just painting. I think they call it painting the negative shapes, but I don't know. But they are. We just sort of shrink him a bit. And again, take a bit of the blue that you're using as a sort of shadow, and just put a bit of blue underneath him, sort of anchor him. In fact, that girl could have a bit of shadow just to anchor him to the ground a bit. You see? Then we get to the easiest figures of all, which are these two that sat on the sand dunes. Because these two that sat on the sand dunes, you have a bit of ultramarine blue with a just soften it with a tiny bit of burnt sienna. Because here all you've got is his back. There you are. One figure. get the flesh colour that you've been using to do a pale flesh colour of the head, which doesn't really show up very much. And then we'll put some blue, put some colour on the hair. And then you'll start to see that he has a little bit of a neck. In fact, he might have a little white collar to his shirt. That would be nice. Why don't we just put a bit of white on there, on the back? A bit of highlight on him. And he needs a bit of brighter blue, perhaps on one side, on that arm. And a bit of darker blue. Now, it's not dark blue, it's almost black. So again, mixing the ultramarine blue into the burnt sienna. A bit too much burnt sienna, a bit more ultramarine blue. There we are, we'll just give him a bit of shape. And you see there's somebody sat there now. That little bit of neck is quite important. Now this person, she's obviously going to be sat looking the other way. Now she wants to be sort of a pink, but I'm going to use cadmium red and white, which gives you a very different sort of pink to your rose or your magenta and white. It should give you a more different kind of pink. She's got much more of a red, pale red, and she's sat a bit sideways, but you can almost see a bit more of her. So she's got, I'm doing an arm down there and put a bit more pure red on the back of her there so that that arm sticks out. Now, whether you're going to see another colour, you might see another colour where her skirt is or her shorts are, and that could be a colour that's going to look. Let's just mix up a green. We haven't used any lemon yellow. Let's mix, if you mix lemon yellow and cerulean blue, you get a really bright, really sort of, there, that sort of lime type green colour. We might just put a bit of green in there. No, it's not really showing up. Let's make it yellow. Or just put some pure yellow in, just put a blob of yellow in there, in that triangle, which might just give a sort of skirt. I don't know. Making this up as you go along. This is the special. This is the nice bit of painting. It's just playing with it. She wants some flesh colour on the head, and then she's going to be a bit more. What we could do is put a hat on, couldn't we? Do you fancy putting a hat on her?
Yes.
Let's go for some raw sienna.
You make this look so easy.
Yeah.
It is easy. You will find it easy.
I don't think my figures are going to look like this.
You will have hours and hours to practice. It'll be fine.
I have to omit them all together.
Lucky it's Easter.
It'll be fine. And then I'm just being a bit fiddly here. We're just trying to give her a hat with a band on it. I don't know if that's good. I'm not terribly good at hats, but anyway, that'll do, won't it? You can improve the look of the hat by underneath it. You give her a ponytail. I'm quite keen on ponytails because or hair going down the back, because it gives you the idea of which way they're looking. So we've now got two figures and another figure. There's a lot of figures going in here, isn't there? Giving you a lot to practice. Now, we're getting on with this painting quite well. I'm going to leave the dunes till last, but I'm just going to move over here a little bit now, because we've still got this fabulous windbreak to do, and we've got 3 more figures. Right, I'm going to show you how to do the windbreak. Because if you want a windbreak where the light is shining through from, you know, it's not just a solid colour, it's useful to put it on a dry canvas. This is the only bit of the whole painting that hasn't been painted at all yet. And there's a reason for that, and that's because I'm going to now paint the windbreak. Now, I'm starting off with the brown, which is the burnt sienna with a little bit of ultramarine in it, and the round brush, because what I want to do first, I probably need a bit darker than that, a bit more burnt sienna, just make a sort of chocolate brown. Because what I want to do is I want to put the stakes in the ground. And we've got all of these, and these are just the stakes which are going in to hold the windbreak up, right? So we've got those. We can do that. Now, what we need is either the number 4 filbert, which I've mentioned, or I've also got here, and you've probably got something in your collection, a little small flat brush, number 2. Because I'm looking at these, and the thing about these windbreaks is they're not just one colour, they're different stripes. And if you think about it, that brush is going to be quite good for the size. I mean, you might have a slightly bigger brush because that's almost a bit too small, of the stripe. So what we need to do here is get some very pure colour, and it's going to be relatively impasto. It's going to be quite thick, but also it's going on dry. So there's no way you want to thin your colours at all for this. I'm going to take some of my lemon yellow and put a little bit of white in it to make it even brighter. So I'll just show you on the list. I think you can now start to see how my palette's getting a bit messy as we're getting on with this. That one. Yes. Here's my yellow, and I've moved the yellow down here, and I've added a big lump of white into it, and it's, look at that, it says the lightness on there. Because I want that to be really strong, so I'm going to try and load the brush with quite a lot of paint. I mean, that amount of paint on the brush, so it's quite a bit. Right, we'll do this for each of the colours. So we want to go across and across. In fact, it needs to be even thicker, really. What you could do is you could use an impasto medium into this if you had some gel or something. Sorry? If you had some wax medium or something in it. But I want to sort of go two big stripes, really thick. It's not actually quite as effective as I thought it was going to be doing this. Damn. Doesn't really show up very much, but it is actually a very bright lemon yellow. And then I'm going to take some pure cerulean blue, and again go like that. You might have to wipe the brush because you don't want to pick up the yellow, you want to have the blue coming in. Bring it across like that. And then I think at the bottom there might even be a dark blue. There might be a base on this, so we just go along here to anchor it all into the painting. It's not bad, but I tend to do the windbreaks that loosely. Then I take my dark ultramarine blue figure here, and I just put my chap at the top, which is similar to the same technique over here. He's just got a little bit there and a little bit of the head there, right? Now, when this is dry, and I can't demonstrate this bit because it's not finished yet, but we can have a go at it when we come to the second lesson, and I'll show you one or two techniques that you can do on your painting to sort of put extra shadow and thing into it, because there would technically be a shadow of this gentleman's body against the windbreak. But that's all thick, wet paint. Now, by next week, that will be dry. So then I can show you a different technique for putting shadows in, and also for putting more shadow on the sand as well. We're going to have something to teach you next week as well. So in the meantime, we need a little colour. We need another colour for this figure, and it's going to have to be red or pink because I don't really want it to be blue or yellow. So this person's going to have pink. It's going to have a pink dress. I think she's going to have a dress on. Should we have a little dress on? Let's just put a long shape down there. And
I'm interested that on the windbreak you didn't use any red, which is in the picture. Is that because it wouldn't go with the other colour?
Well, we could put a red. Yeah, we could put a red stripe. I didn't really think about it, to be honest. I was getting hung up on my yellows. So yeah, we could put red on it. I'll put some red on it in a minute. I'm just going with the yeah, well, let's put a bit of blue onto this girl there on the bottom, and we'll come back and just put some red on my windbreak. It's a good idea. There's another figure sat down here with a white t-shirt on. None of them have got any stripy t-shirts on yet, have they? Get some white on this one and a bit of blue, a bit of she's got turquoise blue on her. This figure is just sat, so you've just got, again, you've got the back of the figure, and you've got and the knees coming up here. But actually, that's going to be quite difficult to show up against the sand, isn't it? Let's just put some, she's got to have some dark, she's got her hand, and her hand is probably coming down there as well. Yeah, she's probably leaning over. This is the last figure. I'm getting a bit figured out now, you know. So she's
an awful lot of figures for me. I've never done a figure before.
Well, the thing is, it's also a question of being able to sort of show you what's possible. You don't have to put all these figures in, But if I'm painting them in different ways, you can see what I've done, and hopefully you can take what you want from that.
Yeah.
And have a go. This figure's got a bit, she's got a bit dodgy. This leg's not really showing up. She wants to be darker and maybe carrying something, but oh, she got a bucket or something. She might have a bucket. Might be a yellow bucket. She got a yellow bucket. I'm going a bit, it's going a bit mad now. We're doing a bit too much. So yeah, finally, in this painting, you're right, we could do a little red stripe. Now this is where it's very tricky. We could put a little red stripe into this windbreak. Now we've got to try and go along here with a very thin, heavily laden brush. Just go into there in between, but you need to wipe the brush and clean it and replenish it with new red paint every time you make a mark. Otherwise, it's not going to show up. So there's another red stripe there. In fact, you can see it's going darker. It's not really quite as bright red, but then it's only a very thin line. Happy?
Yeah, very good.
Right, finally, in this session, we need to put some dunes on these, some grass on these sand dunes. And then I'm aware that there should be shadow in this sand and shadow on the windbreak. And I want to show you how to do that when the canvas is dry. So I'm not going to do that, but this isn't a completely finished painting. It's going to need to have a little bit more work on it. What you can do with the dunes is you can put them on with a palette knife and a little bit of texture. Have either of you got any texture gel or wax medium?
No.
Right, in that case, I'll put them on in pure paint. I'm going to pause this recording for a moment while I go and find my palette knife. So this is the painting knife that I like to use. It's actually got a rounded end rather than a pointed end. And it has got, it's a painting knife because it's got this space for your knuckles. If the blade comes straight up, then that is purely a palette knife, which really is only designed for mixing colours. This is designed for, you can use it for mixing colours, but it's also designed for painting with. I'm going to bring this so that we've got the whole of, sorry?
I said that's interesting. I didn't know that, yeah.
Yeah, well, yeah, strictly speaking, this isn't a palette knife, but everybody calls it that. Quite frankly, that's fine. Now, I want to mix up a colour for the dunes, but instead of putting them in with a brush, I'm going to put them in with a knife. If I take some of the lemon yellow and a little bit of the ultramarine blue, but keep it very yellow, so it's 90% yellow, even though that's looking quite green. So I'll just get this, let's just have a quick, show you what I'm doing on here so you can see. See what a mess the palette's getting to now. We're getting into chaos time. This is now getting to the time when you really need to clean your palettes up. I've got here my lemon yellow, predominantly lemon yellow with white and a little bit of ultramarine blue. In fact, I put too much blue in it, but it's taken a lot of yellow to get a lemony yellowish colour for the dunes. And I think that will do to start with. So I'm going to take that and load the palette knife. I need to make some free videos as well for people. One of them is going to be how to apply paint with a palette knife. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to take this loaded palette knife and in the dip of the dunes, where I want my grass to be, I'm just going to scratch it in using the sort of top end of the blade. There's a bit more in there. I think we're going to need a bit of dark in here as well looking at this, but I'm going to put the light in first. There's going to be quite a bit of grass on that corner. And I'm sort of plastering it in a bit like you might be icing a cake, really, I suppose. There's a bit going in there, and then there's going to be a little tuft up on the end that's going to stay light. I'm just going to dip the brush now into the ultramarine blue, so I've got a much darker green on my knife to add a bit of extra depth. You can do this with a brush, but as you're learning, it might be quite useful to do something with a palette knife as well, to give you some new techniques to show. That's looking a bit washed out. You know why? Because the sun is coming out, and as the sun is coming out in the studio, it's washing the colour off the painting. I think if I do that, does that be better? Sorry?
Yes, that's better.
It was getting too, it's getting too pale. It's getting very
Yes.
pale because it's getting very sunny. And my
No, that's much better.
husband needs to put the blinds up, but he hasn't. They only came a couple of days ago, and he's disappeared off somewhere. So I'm just putting those little bits of stretching that in to finish it off at this, or to get it to its sort of 3/4 finished stage. Because I think now that painting is now coming together quite nicely. And what I want to do is to just come out to the other view. So if you just bear with me a brief second, I'm just going to bring this camera out back to about there. Across a bit, no, the other way. Right, that's better. Move that up. So that we've got the whole painting. And is it on?
Very nice.
Yes, it is. So now you can see that we've got the whole painting as far as I've managed to do it. Now, I would say that at this stage, and this is going to take quite a long time to do, I like the sky, I like the sea in the background. These figures are looking okay. We could put a little bit of a purple, what I'm going to show you next week is we're going to have a little bit of a purple glaze on top to provide some more shadow on the wet sand. We really need some shadows going in here. On the shadow of the guy standing in front of the windbreak, so that it starts to look more translucent. And I think again a little bit more shadow needs to go into into the dunes, because I'm not sure that my dark was really dark enough. But instead of repainting them, I'm going to show you next week how you can do those adjustments to your painting once the first layer is dry. And I've given you an awful lot of ideas for figures and quite a lot of technique for brushwork and colours for the skies and the dunes and everything. So I think for this lesson, you've got a lot of information to be working on.